Okay, guys, we are ready to go today and talking about the Protestant Reformation, just one of the most intense time periods in European history. So let's get right down to it. Okay, so basically, what we're looking at is that the Catholic Church has some issues. You've got massive corruptions. Many priests and bishops often do things for financial gain, and instead of distributing all the money they're supposed to the poor, they take it for themselves. There's actually like no rules on how people become priests. I mean, technically, you didn't even have to read the Bible, you just had to kind of memorize the Mass. The tremendous wealth, as you have here, if you look on the right over by the mouse, that is the interior of St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican, where incredibly beautiful, but do we need to use all the money for that? And all that Renaissance art and architecture I already talked to you about, incredible, but did the church need to pay for it? Also, they have massive amounts of control. They can threaten to excommunicate you, which basically ends your life. You have to go to Mass. It has to be in Latin. You can't even read a Bible. It's pretty crazy. You have lots of impropriety, bishops and popes having tons of affairs and illegitimate children all over the place. And then you have some issues regarding the church itself and how one can also become a priest through something called simony and lay investiture. Simony is actually paying to become like a bishop or a archbishop or something along that line. Remember our boys, the De Medicis, who they'll be back. And then you have lay investiture, which I'll be talking about more importantly later on in Spain, and the idea that you can allow kings and queens to appoint their own bishops, and it was really just a mess. Now, prior to the actual Reformation, there were some people that were willing to challenge this church. And one of the early big guys is John Wycliffe, an Englishman that was actually quoted as saying, "The worldly church does not control your destiny or soul to heaven." He is going to be really big about faith when it comes to salvation and going to heaven, which will be repeated. I'll get there. He was also really big on equality. He actually felt that people really didn't even have to go to church, and he was kind of an anti-clerical guy, which a lot of people, of course, did not like. One of the biggest things that he did, however, was translating the Bible into English. Now, it's Middle English over here. I know you're looking at it, you're like, what the heck? I swear to God, it's English, I really promise. But the problem that, of course, that did is it challenged the church, and he kind of spent a lot of his life on the run. Luckily enough for him, he was far away from the Vatican to, say, get himself in trouble. Um, but, a lot of people in the future would look at him as kind of this inspiration, if you will. And that was really important that he kind of set this tone of challenging the church and really knew where they were controlling people, which of course, which was, through like money and things like that. Unfortunately for him, no one really agreed with him. Although in the future there will be a group of people called Lollards that will also try to basically kind of not really like break away from the church, but talk about it. But he really would be the inspiration for guys like Martin Luther and others. And the big guy that's really going to be the mainstay here is going to be Jan Hus. Jan Hus lived from 1369 to 1415, and he was a Czech. He was really against the power of the church, and one of his big things is he really was against the sacraments, most notably the Eucharist. He felt that the sacraments were a way for the church to have greater control over people, and that in the end, spiritually, they really didn't matter. He was very much against the wealth of the church as well as a variety of other doctrines. Now, he was incredibly popular, both with regular people religiously as well as independently. The Czechs were part of the Holy Roman Empire, and he was big on Czech independence. And he was incredibly well spoken. He was a little bit of a writer, and a lot of people kind of saw him as maybe a guy that could have gotten the Reformation going. Unfortunately for him, he falls for a bit of a trick. Under Pope John the 23rd, he was not John the 23rd, sorry, John the 13th. I mixed it up a little bit there. He was invited to the Vatican at something called the Council of Constance, in which they were supposed to discuss many of the church issues that he was bringing up. Now, the way he was tricked was that supposedly the Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund promised that he would be kept safe. Well, when he got there, he was promptly arrested and then executed. And of course, our standard execution here, he was burned at the stake. Interestingly enough, John Wycliffe, who had been dead for really like 30, 40 years, actually closer to 40 years at this point, was also deemed a heretic, and they actually exhumed his body and burned it as well. So these guys are really going to make sure that uh, no resistance will be had. Unfortunately for them being the Catholic Church here, the Hussites, or the follower of Jan Hus, will actually fight a series of short wars against the church. They will not be victorious, but again setting the tone here. Now, the guy that's really going to be the center of all of this is a man by the name of Martin Luther, and he is undoubtedly one of the most influential men that has ever lived. What he is going to do is really going to be mind blowing here. He is a German, and of all the people to change the world, this is the last guy you would have thought. He grew up very strict. I mean, there's these stories that one time he took a nut without asking, so his mom beat him with a wooden spoon until he was unconscious and bloody. That he went to a very strict grammar school, and one time when doing some work in Latin, he was declining or conjugating a noun, and he made a mistake, and the teacher flogged him with a whip 16 times, which would also render him unconscious. As a result, this man, for much of his life, always thought he was a sinner, which I'll get to. He was very nervous around other people and seemed to be a relatively quiet guy that was kind of scared of his own shadow. We actually have a lot of his own writings about him as well. Now, initially, he decides that he's going to go to college to become a lawyer, and his parents were paying for it, and all seemed to be going rather well. He was a pretty good student. And then something remarkably happened. This, my friends, is a lightning storm. It is very scary. You should not be out in a lightning storm. Martin Luther was out in a lightning storm, and evidently either came very close to being struck by lightning or was actually struck by lightning. And as a result of him being struck by lightning, he decided that he is now going to dedicate his life to St. Anne, who he felt got him through the storm alive, and become a monk. And he will go to school and he will be very successful, and eventually he does indeed become a monk. Now, what you have here is that his life as a monk was pretty good. He would confess a lot, so much so that the monks at the monastery actually were kind of tired of him. So they are going to send him off to Wittenberg. Yes, Wittenberg. That's German. I probably pronounce it wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm close to it. And while at Wittenberg, that's actually not only a monastery, but also a school. And he starts to study a lot, and he kind of has some issues here. He looks at faith and the sacraments. He studies the Bible a lot. He reads it every day. And he really felt again that he was sinning and not really doing the best he could for God. And so eventually he feels like, you know what, I think I'm going to go to Rome. And if I go to Rome, then maybe I can have a deeper understanding of what's going on and my life can be a little bit better. And he goes to Rome and it shakes him to his core. Um, he sees the wealth, he sees really prostitution running amok within the city. He goes to masses where priests go through it in like 20 minutes and don't even serve confessions, which for Martin Luther is pretty bad. Don't worry, he'll confess himself, and many oftentimes he beats himself because he feels that his penance isn't enough. And when he comes home from Rome, he really has some pretty big revelations, and he really feels that in the end that it is only faith in God and reading the Bible which is going to lead to salvation. And things like good works and fasting and pilgrimages and building churches and all this other type of stuff, it doesn't get into heaven. And you won't get into heaven. And he really feels that the church had lost its way. They're not helping the poor, they're not helping the downtrodden. But the problem is again, he's a guy that's really quiet. He keeps to himself, and he doesn't know exactly what he wants to do in his life. But something's going to change that. And we're going to get to that in the next video, but this is just that quick intro, and I threw a lot of stuff out at you, and we're going to get deeper into some of those guys like Wycliffe and Hus as well, and a little bit more about Martin Luther's background as we go on. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Make sure you throw in a comment, make sure you get your questions, and I'll see you then.